Dr. George Vithoulkas has been in Cyprus recently for a seminar on alternative therapies and particularly his speciality, homeopathy. Dr. Vithoulkas, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you, first of all, how you got involved and interested in homeopathy? It was a long time ago, perhaps, but what was it that made you think that this had something to offer?
I see, that was 40 years ago, exactly, 59, and what led me to homeopathy, it was just reading a book on homeopathy, in which I immediately found out that this was a fantastic therapeutic system. And then I tried to immediately find out whether it was taught, such a wonderful system, and I found out that it was taught nowhere in Europe or America. Then I found out finally it was taught in India and Mexico, and I was in South Africa by this time, and I was suffering with a problem myself, quite severe, with my spine. And immediately I started studying it there, and I treated myself, and I immediately found the results, and then I treated my friends, and then, of course, I went to South Africa. I followed some schools there that were very low standard at the moment, and I went to India because I was so excited about this system. And unfortunately in India I was also very much disappointed with the standard of teaching by that time. I'm talking about in India was from 63 to 66. By 67 I returned back to Greece, and I started practicing, and I started observing and the patients and the problems which I would see, and I would put a lot of questions to myself because there were some missing links in homeopathy to make it a real system of medicine. And eventually through all this research and study and observation, I found out quite a lot of new things which were missing actually from the theory and practice of homeopathy.
It was invented, though, in the first place, wasn't it, by a European? It seems odd that it didn't really get very much acceptance initially in Europe.
Yes, it was actually in 1810. It was brought out by the German Samuel Hahnemann, who for the first time gave it as a system of medicine. Of course, Hippocrates had said that likes are cured by likes, and he gave a very simple example. He said, if someone has nausea, in order to be cured, you need to take something which causes nausea, and so he can vomit, and as soon as he vomits, the nausea stops. And it was a very simple logic, of course, and he gave different other examples to support this law of similars, as we call it. But it was Samuel Hahnemann of Germany which formulated it as a system of medicine.
It's been an accepted, and increasingly it is an accepted system of medicine. I'm interested to know whether or not the original sort of arsenal of medicaments is still very much what's used today, because we hear every day, of course, in conventional medicine of research, of new drugs, of new treatments. Does that happen in homeopathy?
Well, it happens to a very small degree, I would say, because the medicines that they were used 200 years ago, they are still used today, actually. And, of course, there is research which is going on, and some information is added either on these particular medications or new ones. But the basic information comes actually from this time and is still used today, and still valid, still cures people, because people are suffering the same way as they used to suffer by that time. And homeopathy seems to be the most natural way of treating diseases, acute or chronic. Actually, I must say that last year I was invited here by the Council of Europe, which was the group studying alternative medicine. And we had a whole day discussions concerning the problems that the homeopathy is facing. And I told them how much homeopathy deserves their attention, and that they should very fast actually devise some laws which will protect the practice of this science, because at this moment the field is open and everybody can enter it and say, I am homeopath or I'm a teacher, etc., etc. What I told them that we require more standards, and we require that these standards are imposed by the medical authorities or the governments in order to have an improvement in the teaching, in the education, and of course in the application of homeopathy.
The seminar you've attended in Cyprus was opened by the Minister of Health, which would suggest first and foremost that there's a nod of approval then from the conventional side of medicine. It's very much accepted now in Europe and indeed in America. There is, for example, in England, the Royal Homeopathic Hospital. It's very respectable now. Is that going to happen in Cyprus, do you think?
I think so. There was actually during the time that the Council of Europe was here and the Minister of Health was opening the discussion that we had, many representatives of different countries, they asked the Minister of Health, what are you doing here in Cyprus for homeopathy? And he was a little bit embarrassed to say, well, we will try to do. And I think this is a follow-up of this pressure that was put already in the government by the Council of Europe. And I believe that soon some measures will be taken in Cyprus to help the spread of homeopathy. It is true, as you said, that in Europe almost 1 in 3 persons seeks alternative therapy, and mostly out of them, mostly they seek homeopathy. So it is a very important element in the medical arena, which is, I'm sorry to say, it is quite neglected by the governments or the medical authorities or the medical schools.
Coming to the attitudes of conventional doctors, because it seems to me that pretty well half of them will refer to an alternative therapy and the other half don't want to know about it. Is that changing?
Well, it is changing, but still exists. Still there are medical doctors that they don't want to hear about it, and they reject, unfortunately, something they don't know, they have not studied, they don't know about it, and a priori they reject it without examining its merits. We as homeopaths, we don't claim to cure everything, and we accept a part of conventional medicine. But we don't accept the overuse of chemical drugs, because we claim, and we have proofs for that the side effects are devastating, long-lasting, from generation to generation. They become worse and worse, and that in the West today we have developed diseases which are not known in the countries where they don't use chemical drugs, like Africa, like South America, like Asia, undeveloped countries where they don't use conventional chemical drugs. They don't have diseases like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease. They don't have schizophrenia so much. They don't have neuromuscular diseases, myopathy, myasthenia, muscular dystrophy. All these diseases, which are very deep and incurable, actually, by anything, even by homeopathy, is the privilege, in quotation marks, of the Western population, actually. So we claim that there is a connection between these serious diseases and at the same time the chemical drugs that have been ingested by the Western population for the last 50 years.
What about the use of homeopathy in a preventative term?
Well, actually, homeopathy has its best results when the disease is starting, when the chronic diseases are starting in the beginning of chronic diseases. And that is why we say it is the best preventive medicine, because if you bring back an organism who is entering now a new chronic state of health, and you nullify that by the correct homeopathic medicine, then it is actually the preventive medicine. Unfortunately, this has not been understood. The importance of that fact has not been understood by the authorities.
Can I ask you finally about the attitude of the general public? Because they are much more receptive to all sorts of alternative therapies. We read about homeopathy and herbalism and other things in magazines, in newspapers. It's there all over the place. Their attitude is more receptive, but does that mean that they're also seeking the over-the-counter remedies? Because a lot of health food shops and so on have remedies that you can buy and administer at home.
This is one of the problems we discussed with the Council of Europe, and I said, well, the demand from the part of the population is becoming more and more, but the population is not protected. They're going to use over-the-counter. They are going to use any doctor or homeopath or practitioner who says I'm a homeopath. But in actual fact, homeopathy cannot be practiced in this way. It's a science, and it requires somebody who understands the science to prescribe for the person and to prescribe carefully. So the person, year after year, becomes better and better. Not that the symptoms for a while, they just go away, because this is what chemical drugs are doing, actually suppressing for a time being the symptoms.
Okay, so you're talking about the holistic approach, but are you saying then that over-the-counter remedies really are not a good idea?
Not a good idea for homeopathy, no. Homeopathy is a very precise science, I would say, and we, as homeopaths, we have to study very carefully an organism before we touch this organism with the correct remedy.
All right, can I just touch then on the fact that you said a lot of people can set themselves up as homeopaths or alternative practitioners of any form of alternative therapy without maybe proper training, or indeed sometimes any training. How do I know, if I approach a homeopath, that he is qualified to treat me?
Absolutely. This was another problem which I discussed with the Council of Europe. I said people are not protected unless there is some authorization and some schools that are authorized and covered by the government, that so the doctor or the practitioner has followed the schools, therefore there is a guarantee on the part of the patient that this particular person has the least possible training.
But how can I tell?
But how can you tell now? It's not possible to tell now, because anybody who will say, I'm a homeopath, he will have patients, because the demand is quite exploding.
So there's no way that somebody can go and do a course and get a diploma and say, this shows that I have studied?
Well, there are certain courses, but who controls the standards of these courses, what is taught there in the courses? It can be taught nonsense, and still people can say, I went through this course of natural medicine or whatever, or homeopathy.
Well, what's your advice then to somebody who thinks they would like to try homeopathic remedies and treatment? What do they do?
At this moment, it's not possible to give an advice. They have to go to the doctors who they practice, who they say, I am a homeopath. They have to go and try with them. It is not possible to make distinctions and put down the names of certain people. Here in Cyprus, there are some of my students also who are working, but I don't want to make advertising for certain people. They will kill me, the others, you know. And but even then, I would say they are not properly trained. What I mean properly trained for a medical doctor, I mean 5 years of training actually, before he can really grasp the complexity of homeopathy. It is a very complex and effective system of medicine if it is practiced properly. and it is useless if it is practiced improperly. That means it can have no effect at all, or it can cure a very serious condition, depending on the practitioner whether he will find the correct remedy for the particular person.
Finally, are you hopeful that homeopathy will get the standards you're looking for, and that people will still be going to homeopaths in another 100 or 200 years?
Well, I have been asked these questions for the last few years, and I always say that in the way things are going at the moment, I don't have much hope. Maybe, I will say after 50 years, maybe. But maybe there is a momentum. That means more and more people will demand, and more people will pressurize the governmental agencies to imply force and to imply and to give support. So the whole movement will take another momentum. For instance, as you may know, I have been receiving the Alternative Nobel Prize for 1966, and immediately after that, I was invited by the Euro Parliament to meet the people and discuss with the study group on alternative therapies. I met with the Minister of Health, and I met with the President of the Euro Parliament, and the Minister of Health, Ken Collins, who is a personality in the Euro Parliament. He was against passing a law because he could not actually find out what was right and what was wrong, because the study group could not find a way to present the issues and the problems. And when I met him, he was against. But in the 15 minutes discussion we had, he understood that he had to do that, at least for medical doctors, to pass a law for the governments to give money for research on homeopathy and to promote issues of homeopathy, because he understood. I was amazed how fast this man, who was against homeopathy, how fast he perceived the importance of homeopathy, and he actually within 2 months passed this Euro Parliament directive, which is going to the Euro Parliament member to the countries. And at this moment, all the countries, they are obliged to give some money to support the development of homeopathy.
So it's not looking so bad after all.
It's not looking so bad after all. But how many Ken Collins can we have? How many people with open mind? I mean, in the different governments, people are, the lobbies, the pharmaceutical lobby, so strong that they cut down, the progress at the same time. So we have, I was amazed with the action he took and the courage he had, but I don't know how many in the different governments, how many ministers of health can have his courage.
Well, we will hope. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Salsa.